Yeah, I've also had the super fun pleasure of working in the office next door to Alfred for a while, and connected with some of this team, and actually been at a couple of these meetings. And we're super pleased, obviously, at Engage that we're having this partnership and theming it off of quality of life. But from the ones that I've attended, it's not really, you're not deviating from the norm, because I think what often gets shared here is people's really genuine experiences of how they lived their lives in Halifax, of how they lived their lives before they came here, and in a really vulnerable and unique way. And often at Engage, we do these morning check-ins on Tuesdays, where we just sort of come together and connect in big blue comfy chairs. And we've been going so hard lately that I actually had to miss that one and sacrifice a bit of my quality of life this morning. But that's exactly what it's about. It's just coming in, checking in, leaving kind of judgment behind, and sharing what's most important to you. And I normally don't have nerves when I do it, because there's just 5 of us in a circle, and now there's about 200 of us in a circle. So I'll try and be just as open as I normally am with my colleagues. But I'd like to share, I guess, a little bit about who I am, and then maybe a little bit about why this work that I'm doing is so connected, really, to who I am. So I've only been in Halifax for about a year, but I'm just from the province next door, from New Brunswick, and I grew up there for most of my life, and came to Halifax a lot to kayak in Dartmouth on Lake Bannock. And so I always sort of perceived myself to be more of like an Atlantic Canadian than anything, and I still see myself that way. I go back to New Brunswick, and I have my New Brunswick hat on, but this place is dear and close to my heart. But it wasn't actually here where I really reflected on this idea of quality of life and what that means to me. It took going away for a while to really realize what we have to treasure here, what is so important about living here, about having family here, about the ability to stay and travel within this region and meet people within this region. It's not that I took it for granted when I grew up, but it was what was normal to me. It was my life. And then I went and had the great privilege of going to high school for a couple of years in a very, very small school in Costa Rica. And there was just about 150 of us living in this little community. And we made a really close connection to the community that I lived in. And then I sort of started to fall in love with most of Latin America. And for those of you who will have traveled there, you'll recognize I think what I like to call a cultural affinity. Now, we eat entirely different food here. We speak an entirely different language. Where there's no way that you can make a comparison between the cultures. But what is unique to the Maritimes and to that region is that there's this idea that family comes first before everything. That spending time with people comes before spending time working, or that uniting over something like going out to a bar like this and is a top priority. And so it was that experience, I think, that sort of 2-3 years away, that made me think maybe there is really something intangible about where we live, about where we are growing up here, about cities like Halifax, or cities like St. John, where I'm from, that aren't really receiving enough attention. And so the work that we're doing at Engage is about giving attention to, I think, something that's really special that often misses a beat for most people because of sort of the sluggish narrative that we use to describe who we are as a people. But we all kind of here in this room today know that there's a lot more to it than that. And so this is just sort of everyday experiences for most of us, but it has a much bigger and more profound impact than that. It results in our ability to attract people to come here. It results in it has economic implications. It has health implications, and on and on. So I just feel really privileged to be able to do this work. But I also recognize that it's super aspirational in nature, and so I don't want to spend too much time talking about what it is I do, but I do want to share a story that I'm really just ripping off from a documentary I saw recently. But it was so brilliant and it resonated with me, and I want to share it because I think it might sort of click a beat about why you're measuring something as sort of fluffy as quality of life, or something that is not going to have serious one-year implications like when you invest in a business, or those kind of things that are as measurable as the financial things that we tend to put in the spotlight. And so I was watching this piece the other day on this man. He's a 96-year-old man who lobbies the United Nations still today to make the crime of war making a crime against humanity. So the idea that when you incite war, so anything that like aggravates another country. So he's an American, and he actually fought in World War II as like a 19-year-old. And he's probably about 4 feet tall now. And you see him there with all these world leaders, and it's honestly just like the cutest thing in the world. And he hands out these pamphlets, and he gives people Hershey's Kisses when he does it. And he's there with people like the President of the United States trying to enact this law. And there's this interview with him, and he's in his like tiny little modest house in the middle of nowhere in the U.S. And he has this sign on the plaque of his office that says, Tycho Brahe ad infinitum. And so Tycho Brahe is a Danish astronomer. And so he sits down in his chair. This guy's name is Benjamin Ferencz. And he's telling the story of Tycho Brahe. And what he says is, so he goes back and he says, in the 1500s, there was this Danish astronomer. And the king of the Danish kingdom at the time said, we want to learn about the skies. We want to learn about what's going on in the stars. Something that people felt was such a weird thing to try and measure, to try and keep track of. But he said, no, go out there and learn something. And so he did. And he had what at the time was an observatory, in probably far different than what they are now. And he stayed there for 25 years. And 25 years was also the reign of the king in power at the time. And so when that king left power, a new king came in, and he said, like, I don't understand what's going on out there. Someone's got to go check what's going on. And so he sent his treasurers at the time, and he said, go see what's going on out there near Elsinore. And so these two treasurers of the kingdom, they went out, and they see this guy, Tycho, and they meet him, and they say, so, like, we're from the treasury, and we're wondering, like, what the hell is going on here? Like, what have you been doing for 25 years? And he just looks at them, and he goes, well, I've been watching the skies. And he said, watching the skies? Like, what does that mean? He goes, yeah, I've got 97 volumes of recording the movements in the stars every single night. And they looked at him with that same sense of awe and just said, 97 volumes of the stars. Like, what's the purpose of that? What is that going to get to? He goes, well, one day I hope to get to 100. And they said, well, 100 volumes of the same thing? Like, where is this ever going to take us? And he goes, well, I admit, while I haven't found the answers to the universe, I believe that someday somebody will, and I will have saved that person 25 years of trouble. And so then this Benjamin Ferencz, this cute old man, he starts to tear up in the video, in the documentary, and he goes, so that's it. I'm just watching the skies. And when we think about this idea of measuring quality of life, or measuring the intangible, or the conversations that we're going to have here tonight, you don't really think about like the type of impact that they can have on public policy, or on economics, or on the way that we work day in or day out. But they do have impacts, and they just take a long time to resonate. And if you're an environmental activist in the room today, you'll probably resonate with that as well, because the work that you start to do might not be realized until your children are born. And so the idea of a quality of life framework for us is well, it has to be work that you just sort of know, I may die and not see the results of what I am doing, but I recognize that there is sort of a next stage to this. And so the intangibles that we have as Maritimers, the intangibles that we have as newcomers here, and the things that we cherish and value may very well not sort of play out or be news headlines for a long time to come, but we have engaged, and me personally find them very important. So we're just watching the skies and having a lot of fun doing it, and I'm having a lot of fun in this city, and I really appreciate the stage that you've given us. So thank you so much, and I hope to chat with some of you guys about some of the maybe less philosophical components of the work today. I'd be happy to share what that's about. So thank you.